this was our next directing, and you see that we had. Before I talk about that, actually, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what Hannah did with the Leah monologue in the last NGC, because I actually forgot to talk about that in my last blog. Basically, she worked through the main blocking of elements of Leah's monologue with the set. So she talked about the bits where she would have this physical interaction with Phil. When she talks about, I'm moving away, Phil, I'm gone, I'm out of here, I'm a jet plane, I'm discovering. She's in efforts to get his attention, and I think in this monologue you see aspects of her many ways to try and get Phil's attention, to the point where she realizes that it is not going to happen. And at the beginning you think it might be then, but it's not. That is still her efforts to try and get his attention, so that needs to be over dramatic, it needs to be overemphasized. I think that Hannah got that really well across to Vicky in terms of her portrayal of Leah. She has that interaction when she's sitting next to Phil. She's looking at Phil a lot, and Phil is just using his waffle. We haven't had Romario actually do the waffle bit yet, but we had definitely Leah doing that interaction. I think they only just figured out the beginning blocking bits of it, so they looked at where she might move forwards and backwards. It was really sort of basic in terms of where she might move to the words. So in this NCC session, we had a Jan and a Mark, and then we had Hannah look more at Leah's monologue. We had minor setbacks as well, that we found out this lesson that we didn't have a Mark because the actor who was supposed to play Mark, the cast member, wasn't going to attend. So we asked Disney, and he generously, a boy called James Disney, we asked him to step in, and he generously did for us. So in terms of directing, it wasn't ideal, but then it meant that we had that connection. And I don't know whether I'd spoken about this before, as this was a potential idea to start off with if we weren't going to have another if we weren't going to have that Mark that we wanted and that we were given when we were assigned our casts. But it was really good of him, and it also meant that there was more chemistry between the two because they'd worked together. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about like Leah's monologue in terms of what Hannah did, and then because I can talk about what I did with the Jan and Mark scenes more specifically, and what we worked with them then. So we looked at evaluating Leah's monologue more. We put it to a set as much as we could. We didn't have set this time. We were in a classroom, so we used tables and chairs instead as accurately as we could, and we had them work off like we had to like work off what they already knew. So we'd like some reading some of the script, and then looking at evaluating Leah's monologue. So the certain points of interaction that she had, we didn't have a full cast in this time either, but we had her sort of walking in and noticing Phil to start off with, and then in efforts to get his attention, she talks about leaving him. She talks about, oh, you're not even going to stop me, you're not even thinking of stopping me. She repeats, I admire you so much, and this is really important in terms of her character development, because I think she has this desperation. She really, really, really likes him, but he really doesn't like notice her. Almost he uses her, and it's this idea that like it's just like, I think towards the end, as we talked about in Richard's monologues, he realised how much he actually misses her and having her around, but beforehand it really was that he just doesn't even value her presence around. He finds her annoying, and so it's that interaction that is just really difficult and confusing for Leah. She's really in so much efforts to get his attention, and it's you know, Phil is just like, I don't really care. Like he doesn't really, he's not really bothered about anything that she has to say. But she is going on a lot, so it's like really contrasting people that you wouldn't see together, and I think that it's really interesting for an audience to like look at. So she further goes on to like talk about a bit about Adam and the interaction between that, how everyone is sort of changed because of this situation, and this is before they find Adam again, when they think he's dead, and people have become better. They're starting to do charitable things, and it talks about the fact of knowing what they might have done and how they're all behaving like heroes. And we thought about the contrast that Leah would show in terms of when she's trying to get his attention to when she's actually being sincere and confused by the situation. Because often with Leah's character, she seems like really eccentric and really exaggerating, but she does make sense often about what is actually happening. And I think that it provides this sort of context to an audience in terms of, right, this is the actual sense of the situation, and the realistic point of view as well from an outsider point, because Leah sometimes can seem like an outsider even though she often has control in the big scenes and often in the debates, because she's a loud sort of bubbly character, or loud and kind of crazy. Um, so in terms of that, we sort of built on that and built on that aspect, and then she starts talking about how she feels about Phil. She ends it with, "I admire you so much," and we thought it would be really funny and different, and it would add this layer of awkwardness to their interactions as it is already, for Jan and Mark to enter a bit earlier than what it says in the script. Jan and Mark enter the end of Leah's monologue and say, you really have to see this. We have to talk to you. We've really got to talk to you. We've got to tell you something. And it's like Phil is putting away his waffle, and he's like, "Oh, like bloody hell! Like, I really just wanted to have this waffle, and I didn't even want to listen to Leah like go on." And Leah's like, "Oh my god, what's happened now?" And it's like this whole contrast. But we wanted it to be that they come in too early. And there's this like awkward thing where they're like, "Oh, just interrupted something," and Leah's just going off on one again. And then she says, "I admire you so much," and notices them, which makes it even more awkward. So we experimented with the idea of her saying, "I admire you so much" towards Phil, noticing Jan and Mark, and then a quick turn away because she's like, "Oh my god, they just caught me saying that." Even though it's obvious that she likes Phil, it's still like Leah overthinks everything, and at this point it's probably like the idea of her being like, "Oh my god, ground swallow me up," because she's just spouted all of this to Phil, which she would already regret, because she is so much about just saying what's coming out of her mind, because her lines are literally so skittish and they don't make any sense, because she literally says what comes out of her brain straight out loud. So she's obviously already regretting what she's just said to Phil, but saying it in front of Jan and Mark is a really interesting and funny concept that we thought would add a lot to her character. And it also allows Jan and Mark to have an interaction, and I'll use that to sort of lead on to their scenes in a minute. But their sort of characters are never really established at what relationship they're at. You know, most people assume that they are this friends, and quite a lot of people choose to take it that way. But we wanted to experiment with the idea of them potentially being something more, that there's this underlying idea that they're going out, or are they just friends, or like the whole thing explored, because Jan and Mark are never really the centre. They're often used, and I feel that they're often used as the narration points in steps of the play, as they explain what's going on next. They sort of do it in a really subtle way, because it's often with just a general conversation between the two of them, but it's done so that it's like allowing the audience to know what's happening next. Because they say, there was one where they said they found him there, and then the other one where they talk about Leah leaving, she's gone, and it's all about them explaining the little gaps between, so that not everything is acted out. And I think they act really well as like a funny comedy relief from a serious message inside the play. So in terms of that in mind, we wanted them to be a break from the serious bits of Leah's monologue with high emotion, Richard's, which is sort of have a comedy aspect but is also quite comedic because of Richard's character, on the serious bit of the main bit, and Adam's monologue, because it's all high emotion. They provide a good comedy relief from that. So with that in mind, we wanted them to have a great chemistry and funny reactions. So we thought about doing this in different ways, because these are really good scenes to experiment with in terms of how you might visually show them, and they're a good contrast in terms of getting the audience attention, breaking from the major points of the action when they've just heard people talking for ages. So The first one we did both scenes with them in, because we had both actors. We had Nassif and we had James Disney. So we had them in the first one just have a simple interaction. We had them come on, and Nassifa was Jan, playing Jan, was followed by Mark, and it was this like funny, like, okay, okay, okay. And I really liked the way they did it, and we directed them to do it. I focused mainly on the Jan and Mark bit here, so I'll talk about it from my point of view. I really wanted them to be cutting each other off. The lines are really short and snappy, so it works that way. And for them to be like, Jan often comes across a lot more like, not dumb, but like she doesn't understand the situation as well as Mark. So it's like her going, okay, okay, what? Okay, and it's like her understanding, but then she does understand and she's just a bit lost. But it's really funny to see this interaction between the two of them. And we at one point got Mark to sit back onto the set, and in like being fed up because he has to explain a lot to Jan all the time, and we wanted that sort of impression to come across, because it adds onto this characterization of the two, and it helps separate the characters, because in the big group you don't really get to look at the characters individually. And I think definitely a major theme in DNA is the idea that the characters themselves all have characterization, have different like personalities, I guess, and they really stand out. And it was really fun to sort of see the contrast and the characters themselves, because they don't really have a lot to say in the big scene. So this was a good idea, and I think this worked well, was effective. In the second scene with them, we wanted to add an element of something different, so we decided to use phones. We had Jan center stage as the position that she walked in on before, with her phone on her head, and she was going, yes, all right. And she goes, oh no, maybe it's not that, that's his actually. She goes, are you sure, are you sure? And it's sort of this like or something along those lines, where she's talking about whether is he sure that Leah has gone for real. And he's saying yes, but because it's on the phone, we didn't have Mark say it out loud, we just had her talking on the phone, and the answers weren't, because at first they're all the same answer, they're all yes and yeah, and so we didn't have him say anything until he sort of comes on and goes yes, and they have a face-to-face conversation. So it's as if he is walking towards her to meet with her, but he called her just before they meet, and then they have a conversation on set. And we thought this added in an aspect of like them being the gossips. They always find out the information, and they're always the gossips, and they only gossip to each other though, so they're like a little secret side of the big group. And they stay together throughout the whole thing. So this element of like, are they going out as well? Because even when Richard talks about them in the monologue, he talks about them shoplifting, but it's always them two together. With this idea of the phone, it's like he couldn't wait to tell her, which adds in that aspect of like, that's the first person he would talk to. Which is really like interesting, and I think it worked well. It added a new aspect. It was kind of fun to do. And doing it with the two year 12s was easier, and added in this idea of like them contributing their own ideas as well, because they had capability to do so. We looked at like abstract ideas and ways of doing it, but it worked better with naturalistic, especially in terms of the grand scheme, because if an audience was watching and it suddenly became really abstract, it wouldn't make sense in terms of the whole thing. So we had them do it all with like a Stanislavski style, especially with the younger actors, because then it was easier for them to do. And we wanted that style as well, because that's what DNA is sort of tailored towards and is supposed to be like, and we wanted it to seem like that. So that's what we did with Jan and Mark. Finishing it with them both sitting on the set. They're really chill about things, but they do like give off this sense that they enjoy the drama a little bit. So it was really good to sort of definitely we blocked their scenes fully, and with my intentions of that, what I've just spoken about with them. and then the blocking of Leah's monologue fully as well, with Jan and Mark coming in, leading on to maybe running the big scene, and some of the little bits that we have to run through, like the sweet interaction between Leah and Phil. And then transitions of the scenes, which we'll hopefully work on in the next couple of rehearsals.